Okay, let's begin. Good morning. Once again, I am Jeff Peckrell, one of the co-chairs of the Human Rights Working Group here at UU San Francisco, along with Dolores Perez-Heilbrunn and Melvin Starks over there. Just a few housekeeping items. If you haven't been here before, I think everyone has, but just in case, there are bathrooms around the corner. We have breakfast and coffee for you over there. And we do Q&A at the end of the presentation, mostly. So if you have questions while our presenter is talking, please jot them down on the cards that are found on the chairs and the tables, and we'll collect them up and do them mostly all at the end, which will be around 10:20. Okay. I would like to say that we are the Human Rights Working Group, so we're very excited to have today's presenter, which is completely in line with our mission. I'll introduce him properly in a few minutes, but it's going to be a presentation on legal services which are unavailable in an equitable way to many people in our society. So it's trying to rectify that social wrong. Just a few also comments about how we conduct our sessions. So the intention of this presentation is to hear about various issues in our world today and provide a space where many ideas can be heard in an atmosphere of dignity and respect for all participants. Therefore, our expectations for this conversation: please don't use any language which may be interpreted as demeaning to the speaker, the audience, or other groups. Do participate by raising your hand to be recognized. Identify yourself by name, or there are cards available, as I explained. Listen and respect other points of view, and once you have spoken, let others have a chance to speak. Okay, I'll do also some announcements at the end to recap, because we usually have more people by then, but I just want to mention that we don't have forum next Sunday, so there won't be a meeting here at 9 a.m. next Sunday, but the Sunday after that, on April 7th, we will have a foreign policy topic. We'll have Professor Stephen Zunes from University of San Francisco talking about Israel and Palestine. And the week after that, we have a professor from San Francisco State, Anthony D'Agostino, talking about Ukraine and Russia. So please plan to come back for those presentations. Oh, and the weekend after that, we'll have a topic. Jocelyn Lehrer is the presenter's name. She'll be talking about toxic masculinities and kind of addressing that kind of issue. So now I'd like to welcome Dolores to do the Ohlone recognition.
Thank you so much. I'm going to do the Ohlone recognition, and there's some information on the back table about some news from the Ohlone tribes over in the East Bay. We, the members of the First Unitarian Universalist Society of San Francisco, acknowledge that our community is located on the unceded ancestral homeland of the Ramaytush Ohlone tribes, the original inhabitants of the San Francisco Peninsula. We recognize that we benefit from living and working here, and we affirm their sovereign rights as First Peoples. The Greater Bay Area is also the ancestral territory of the Miwoks, Yokuts, Patwin, and other tribes. As the original stewards of this land, the indigenous peoples understood the interconnectedness of all things and maintained harmony with nature for millennia. We want to honor them now for their enduring commitment to our Mother Earth.
Thank you, Dolores. All right, well, our presenter today is Adrian Tirtanadi. He is from Open Door Legal, and Open Door Legal is an award-winning nonprofit pioneering the country's first system of universal access to legal care right here in San Francisco. Over the last decade, they've been growing across the city, including here in the Western Addition, and have achieved some remarkable outcomes. We believe that injustice is the heart of poverty, and we like to imagine a more just society as possible. What would our city be like if we substantially ended domestic violence, wage theft, wrongful foreclosures, and all forms of legal expropriation? The United States ranks the absolute worst high-income country in access to civil justice. As a result, it is incredibly difficult for low-income people to enforce their family, contract, property, and other civil rights. I'll let Adrian speak more about it. At this time, I'd like to welcome Adrian Tirtanadi. Thank you.
Good morning. I'm so excited to be here. Thank you all for coming and for tuning in online. And I want to get the talk started with a little story, one of our clients, just to kind of help center what the work that we are doing is all about. This client was one of our first clients, came to us in our first years, and she was a legal immigrant, had moved to the Bayview as a teenager, had gone to high school in San Francisco, and ended up marrying her high school sweetheart. And unfortunately, the relationship turned dark pretty quickly. They had 2 children together, but he would assault her about twice a week for 8 years. She was hospitalized because of the abuse, but that didn't end it. And finally, one day, her husband calls the cops and says, "My wife has hit me," which wasn't true, but even in that situation, but the cops did come and they arrested her, and she spent 5 nights in jail, and she was released without any criminal charges, but she was given a civil restraining order that prevented her from going home, seeing her children, getting a change of clothes. And so she ended up homeless in San Francisco. And she had a trial coming up on whether or not she would be allowed back in her home. And she went to 5 agencies across the city and asked for legal help with this trial. And they all turned her away. They said, "Oh, this isn't the kind of issue we handle," or "We're already at capacity," or something like that. Fortunately, we had just opened Open Door Legal, and she walked down 3rd Street, saw our sign that said "Get Legal Help," walked in just 3 days before her first hearing, and we took her case. We represented her in the trial. We got her back in the home. We got her husband out of the home. We got her child support. We got her a divorce, even though her husband tried to hide all of the community assets. And as a result, she was able to remain housed, re-enter the workforce, and even complete her citizenship. And all of that was done for a total cost of the org of about $3,000, which you can compare to the costs of homeless services and mental health services and dependency services and everything else that would have been needed. Not even to get her back to, baseline, but just to repair the damage that had been done. So why was it so hard to get help? Well, in California, it's estimated that there are only about 0.79 legal aid attorneys for every 10,000 eligible people. That comes out to fewer than 800 attorneys in the entire state funded to represent people who can't afford it. I recently, just 2 weeks ago, met another one of our clients who was also a domestic violence survivor. She said we were the 34th org that she had contacted for help, 34th. And we were the first one to help. Things are so bad that in the United States, we are actually the only developed country in the world that doesn't guarantee the ability to get publicly funded legal assistance in all civil matters, including domestic violence. We have this idea that you'll get an attorney in criminal law, but in civil law, which is the vast majority of legal issues, we say you have to pay to win. So every blue-colored country on this map is rated as having a more accessible civil justice system, meaning they provide more support to help low-income folks access the civil justice system and, enforce their civil rights. Another example, this client's name is Pobre, also in Bayview. She bought a home with her husband around 95, and he unexpectedly died 6 months later. So for 25 years, she paid the mortgage on this home by herself, spent about 60% of her total income on the mortgage and principal, and raised her daughter there. Her daughter also has special needs. She works as a cleaner, and as she got older, it became harder to make ends meet. So she started falling behind on payments, but she had saved up about $740,000 in equity in this home. And the bank, as soon as she started missing payments, moved to foreclose on the property, didn't tell her about the foreclosure like they were required to, sold the property for $50,000 and 1 penny, and then mailed her a check for 1 penny to represent her 25 years of investment in this property. Then the investment group that bought the property moved to evict her, and that's when she came to Open Door Legal. We filed a lawsuit against the bank. We were able to reverse the foreclosure, get title back in her name, get all of her equity restored, pay off all of her debt, and write a trust so she could pass down the home to her daughter. The city also tried to claim this was a taxable event and tried to triple her property taxes, so we spent another year arguing with the city and got her property taxes restored. And she's still living there now. And one study found that in San Francisco, 84% of foreclosures are done illegally, or with a, quote, major legal violation. And of course, if you're behind on your mortgage, it's gonna be very hard for you to pay for an attorney to sue your bank. So what is Open Door Legal? Well, the theory is to create a general hospital for legal issues, like the country's first general hospital for legal issues. And the idea is that we want to be basically the provider of last resort that ensures everybody in the community can access legal services if they can't afford it. People like Ms. Pobre and like Claudia. Okay. No? Let's see. Yeah, it's okay. It's just taking a while to load. So when I was younger, I was sort of obsessed with figuring out how to address poverty in America. And in college, I studied systemic poverty, and I went to work in community development for a few years. Eventually, I had this thesis, which I believe was an inspiration from God, to focus on legal services as the most cost-effective and sort of the least thought-about way of addressing poverty. So I wrote up this business plan on how to create universal access, and I went to law school, met my friend Virginia, and we started Open Door Legal 2 weeks after I got my license in 2013 in the Bayview. So here's a little bit, we were called Bayview Hunters Point Community Legal at the time. So here's a little, our storefront that we opened in. And it was really hard. I mean, I gotta tell you, it was very, very difficult to raise the money to do it. In our first year, Virginia and I just earned minimum wage. Our total budget was $35,000. And we had literally hundreds of people coming to us asking for help, saying that they couldn't get help anywhere else, you know, that we were their last hope. For about 2 years, I didn't sleep through the night once. I was so stressed. You know, I would wake up covered in sweat like 5 times a night from night terrors. It's really hard to describe the kind of overwhelming need for justice in our society when you kind of open yourself up to being willing to represent people. And we've represented people, hundreds of families now in over 35 areas of law. So here's just a taste of it. You know, everything from estate planning to bankruptcy, identity theft, insurance denial, wage and hour violations, domestic violence restraining orders, evictions, asylum claims. It's very broad. And people ask us, well, what kind of legal issues do you do? And I said, we do whatever people need help with, right? So we're kind of, as I mentioned, a sort of general practice, and we just kind of do the kinds of issues that people come in and request help with. And that's very different from the conventional model of legal aid. We've also built a kind of technology product to do case management, which has also allowed us to build connections with other legal aid orgs with the goal of creating a sort of network that will ensure everybody can access legal services for any issue at any income point from any provider. And that's kind of what we're building here in San Francisco and that's what we mean when we say universal access. So here's a map of Bayview. The community, just a few blocks around our office, every dot is a family we've represented. So about 5 to 10 families on every block. And after 10 years, something like 10 to 20% of the entire population of District 10 has come to us and asked for legal help. And one thing we noticed as we were going about this is that homelessness was declining in District 10. So here's a graph of homelessness. The top bar is kind of San Francisco outside of District 10, and the bottom bar is within District 10, according to the kind of official point in time counts. So a year ago, we contacted a research team to create a study to kind of estimate what impact Open Door Legal had on decreasing homelessness. We put together what's called a treatment control study, where we divided incoming service requests into a treatment or control group based off their zip code. And then we were able to work with HSH, which is Homelessness and Supportive Housing in San Francisco, to determine what percentage of each group subsequently became homeless after requesting help with Open Door Legal. The control group was only given referrals out, whereas the treatment group was given the ability to have an intake with Open Door Legal. And the results are pretty striking. The treatment group decreased subsequent homelessness, whereas the control group increased subsequent homelessness. And this effect, if you look just at people who were at risk of homelessness or currently unhoused, who we represented, basically in 46% of cases where we represented someone who was at risk, we prevented them from becoming homeless relative to the control. And this effect size is large enough to fully explain why homelessness decreased by half in District 10, whereas it increased in the rest of the city. Also in the study, we did some sort of advanced statistical methods, including a difference in difference analysis and a synthetic control, which showed that the housing market and demographic factors of District 10 could not explain the decline. And we also did qualitative interviews with HSH and people who were unhoused and with our clients to show that the work of HSH otherwise couldn't explain the decline. So this is basically what homelessness would have been in District 10 without Open Door Legal. That's the kind of red line. And yeah, it shows that we cut homelessness in half. So what were the legal issues present for people in the study? So you might think it's all eviction defense, and that is definitely a big proximate issue. That's about 26% of the legal issues that kind of cause homelessness. But it's 20% other kinds of housing issues. Those include lockouts, habitability problems, discrimination. Family law is big, torts is big, that's property destruction and personal injury. Employment law, that's things like wage theft. Consumer law, that's like consumer fraud. Immigration, public benefits, elder law. Basically, there's a huge swath of legal issues that people can't get help with, which are causing homelessness. And we decided to divide this into kind of 3 main mechanisms in the study. So the first is property rights. If you are poor in America, you basically don't have property rights because you functionally can't enforce them. Ms. Pobre's case is an example of this, wrongful foreclosure. But there's also probate fraud, there's torts where people convert your property or take your property, consumer fraud, bank liens. Banks tend to kind of semi-randomly seize people's assets. And how are you supposed to get it back if you can't pay for a lawyer because all of your assets were just seen? Here's a quote from one of our clients in the study. Open Door Legal made all the difference. There's absolutely no question we would have ended up homeless on the streets without their help. And this was a probate fraud case. Another mechanism is contract rights. If you are, oops. Sorry about that. If you are born in America, you also don't really have contract rights because you can't enforce them. And a big part of this is actually tenant leases. You know, a lease is a contract, and it contains several implied clauses like habitability and quiet enjoyment. And what happens if your landlord violates this, like refuses to provide you electricity or plumbing? Or, you know, we've had landlords like yell death threats through the wall every night, you know, which violate quiet enjoyment. We've had landlords claim their tenants weren't tenants, that they were squatters, and tried to have the police remove them even though, you know, they had a lease, they paid their rent. How are you supposed to enforce a lease? We've also had landlords, very common, get wrong how much back rent their tenants owe, or claim they owe back rent when they're paid up on their rent. How are you supposed to, like, enforce your contract when you've paid rent to have housing? Another big contract issue is wage theft. It's estimated that 3 times more assets are stolen from low-income workers through wage theft than all property crime in the US combined. And another example is collection defense, where basically companies will try and collect on fraudulent debt through mass lawsuits. So in here's another testimonial. This is from a woman who was locked out of her apartment that she was paid rent for and had all of her property basically removed. And we got it back, and we got her back in the property. Okay, and the last mechanism is sort of like violence prevention and enforcing government action. So restraining orders and domestic violence is one example of that. But you know, anytime basically the government is required to do things and they aren't doing it, that would kind of fall under this bucket, including public benefits. So a recent case was, you know, a man came to us, and he had been on this job, and he had borrowed a spray bottle to disinfect his car because he used it for work, and the company fired him as a result. And he requested and got unemployment, but then the company basically claimed that he had been fired for cause. So not only did they kick him off unemployment, but they charged him for the benefits that he had already received. So basically then the government claimed he owed them $13,000. And as a result, he ended up homeless. And we were able to basically remove that debt and get him back on benefits and get him like back $13,000 in additional assets. And he was able to use that to get into housing. So that's another example of this mechanism. Overall, the average client in the study got $1,700 in cash and $26,000 in canceled debt, as well as a mix of non-financial outcomes like orders of protection and non-cash outcomes. And if you compare this to, let's say, financial assistance as a method for reducing homelessness, you'd see the average cost per household for clients that we represented was about $3,385. The average cost to prevent one spell of homelessness, so this is like the cost times the efficacy, was $7,000, whereas for financial assistance, it's around $50,000 you need to spend to prevent one spell of homelessness. And the average financial benefit the clients received for Open Door Legal was $28,000 in benefits versus somewhere between $700 and $1,800 in the 2 financial assistance studies that were examined. And actually, $50K to prevent one spell of homelessness is pretty good. Unit costs, if you were to compare this to housing, it would be several orders of magnitude cheaper. It costs in San Francisco about $1 million in 4 years to build one permanent supportive unit, and then $20,000 per year in permanent subsidies. So this is why I say injustice is the heart of poverty. A huge proportion of people on our streets are there because they could not access legal services. But if we could provide everyone with legal help, kind of center the work of justice in our social policy, we could make dramatic improvements in homelessness and poverty and all of our social problems. So our mission, or our vision at Open Door Legal is to finish scaling citywide. We have 4 offices now across the city, and we want to have 6, and we want to grow to a budget of about $10 million a year. And at that scale, we believe we can fully satisfy the need for legal services in the city among people that can't afford it. And we want to make San Francisco the first city in the country with universal access to civil justice. And I would like to invite all of you to join us in this, in ushering in the day in a world where the law will belong to all of us, where everybody can access justice, and where we can dramatically reduce homelessness. So, thank you. Yeah.
Adrian, I've been given a glorious task of asking you questions from the audience. Thank you for your wonderful presentation. After poor or homeless people don't realize they can get Social Security and other things, do you help all even though they have no records for income?
So we don't really help with the application phase of public benefits, but we'll help with sort of wrongful denials. So yeah.
Cool. Does your organization help people who are obviously on drugs or maybe high? Do you check your clients' background?
So some of our clients have, substance abuse issues, but it's definitely a small minority. And actually, most people who are homeless don't have major substance abuse or mental health issues. So that's kind of a more visible minority of the homeless population. But I mean, in general, we don't do background checks on clients, right? What we do is assess if they have a viable legal matter and then work with them to address it. And as part of that, there's going to be some conversations about, whatever is going on in their life.
To reiterate what you just said, a majority of houseless individuals do not have substance abuse problems. It's simply the people we notice most that may.
Yeah, and also it's not, the causality is very unclear because it's probably more likely that people start using drugs after they become homeless than they use drugs and that causes them to become homeless.
You presented the undocumented woman in the first example. Could you speak about the legal rights of undocumented people in light of current political hysteria? Do courts distinguish between undocumented people versus citizens?
So first, the first example, she was documented. She was a legal immigrant. But we have represented many undocumented individuals. There's about 50,000 undocumented individuals in San Francisco. And in general, they have all the same legal rights as residents and citizens. You should remember the Constitution precedes any notion of legal residency, which came much later in our history. So, you have the same family rights, you have the same contract rights, you have the same property rights as citizens if you are undocumented.
Can you talk about volunteer opportunities for people who are not attorneys?
So we have a lot of skilled volunteer opportunities, including in fundraising, marketing, software development, recruiting. But I think one thing that's very impactful is to actually help set up more speaking opportunities where I can kind of share more about what we're doing. We also do prayer walks, especially in the Western Edition, so I invite you to join that. And Sierra here can help coordinate.
Can you talk about your funding sources?
Yeah, at this point, it's about 60% public funding. And almost all of that's from the city. And then it's about 40% private funding through a mix of faith-based funders and foundations.
In line with that, should we donate $3,000 to Open Door Legal Services instead of needing to pay more than $75,000 in taxes to cover law enforcement, emergency medicine, and property destruction?
That sounds rhetorical, but the answer is yes. You know, what's really great about this study is there actually isn't an empirical study in the United States directly linking access to legal services with homeless outcomes. So this is the first. And it's not really something that policymakers, academics, you know, think about, right? But now that we have this study, we can show that this is so much more cost effective. I mean, we're honestly a small to mid-sized nonprofit, so for us to be able to cut homelessness in half in one neighborhood is very impressive, I think.
Does your office contend with spurious lawsuits brought by clients? Is there an issue with people exploiting your good graces?
So often clients are sued spuriously, and we'll defend that. If a client is coming to us and asking us to sue someone, we will do the same kind of viability analysis. So we'll say, well, has there been an actual violation? You know, is there good evidence to support it? And then we'll kind of make that decision. We won't file a frivolous lawsuit, basically because we have no real incentive to, right? We have plenty of other cases, you know, plenty of other people to help. And we have no sort of financial incentive to bring frivolous lawsuits. So often in the US, right, in the plaintiff's bar, there's a kind of financial incentive to bring frivolous lawsuits because you can get a quick payout, but we're not paid in that way, right?
This is not a question. I'll try to turn it into a question. Not a question, just wow. Thank you for telling us about Open Door Legal Services. And I guess the question I would ask is, do you understand how much we appreciate your presentation today?
I guess.
At this stage, we've exhausted all the written questions that are in my hand. Do Jeff or Dolores want to force people to write questions for me to ask? Okay, we have an anonymous question here. Based on your map, nearly all other developed countries have laws that provide for those services. Are any of our legislators working towards that?
So there's basically three models that are used to achieve universal access to legal representation in other developed countries, right? So actually in Latin America, most countries in Latin America, the public defender will represent you on all civil matters. So if you're being evicted, you would go to the public defender. If you are having a domestic violence issue or a family law issue, you'd go to the public defender and they would represent you. In the UK, in Canada, and Norway, they will do like private reimbursement. So you would go to a private lawyer, let's say you're being evicted, and they would say, oh, can you afford, you know, my $400 an hour fee? And you're like, no. And they say, okay, we'll just bill the government to represent you. And then in the rest of the developed world, there's kind of like these place-based nonprofit intermediaries, which is kind of like what we're building here. Yeah, countries basically do it differently, but every country has some mechanism to guarantee access to counsel. And in the US, we don't. We only, you know, created it for criminal issues.
How often do you prevail in the cases you take on?
We pretty much always win unless the client disengages from services.
Along those lines, you've highlighted a lot of wonderful examples of people you've helped. Legal services are obviously incredibly expensive. Mm-hmm. And to go to law school is incredibly costly. Mm-hmm. And people, if they're looking at it as an economic determination, serving the public versus serving private interests, it seems like it's much more valuable or profitable to repay legal loans, school education loans, to go into private service. Would you be able to talk about what conscientious attorneys face in our current educational system when they're trying to decide how to channel their energies?
Well, there's a lot that is kind of, let's say, misaligned with our legal system. But one thing is we actually don't need more attorneys. The U.S. has more attorneys per capita than any country in the world except Israel and Greece. So if every other country can create better access to justice using fewer attorneys, I'm sure we can do it, right? Rather, there's something odd about how the legal profession is structured, where at least 60% of all the jobs are in essentially corporate law. And like less than 1% of the total spend is in public defense or legal aid combined. We kind of have to rebalance this, because the truth is, at those funding levels, working in legal aid, doing the kind of cases we're doing, it's the lowest paid job you can get as a lawyer, right? It's paid less than being a teacher, than being a bus driver in San Francisco. There's something really unfair about that.
Do you work with CRLA? What do you think about their work?
We don't work directly with CRLA.
I of course know what CRLA is, but for the benefit of the audience, could you say what that acronym stands for?
I think we're talking about California Rural Legal Assistance, and they're one of many great legal aid orgs in the state. They, like every other legal aid org, is totally overwhelmed, as you would be if you had 800 attorneys and 40 million people.
Any other written questions at this point? Looks like we have one more written question. How many lawyers would be needed to really help the poor? Does the U.S. government help with support or grants for those who might want to do this type of work?
The U.S. government is not super helpful, let's say. If you want to do this type of work, the main thing that's helpful is 10-year public interest debt forgiveness. So that's what many of our attorneys are working towards. So you kind of like pay the interest on your loans for 10 years, and then you can get them forgiven.
Okay.
I lost the first part of the question.
How many lawyers
would
be needed to really help the poor?
Probably you need to have a provider ratio of about 1 to 1,000 eligible people.
1 to 1,000?
Yeah. So we're at, like I said, 1 to 10,000 right now.
So we just need 10 times the lawyers.
10
working
times the
on
lawyers
that area.
Working in this
Gotcha.
issue, yeah. Which is actually, compared to, again, what we're spending on police, incarceration. I mean, we're basically spending so much money to fix the issue of access to justice that it would be way cheaper just to address it directly.
Are you familiar with the work of John Grisham? If so, what is your opinion on it?
The author? I'm familiar with him, but I can't say I've read his books. Yeah, sorry.
Jeff, what's next on the agenda here?
We'll wrap up then. I guess we're done with Q&A.
All right.
Oh,
Okay.
okay.
Well, Adrian, I would like to, we already gave you applause. I think I want to do it again.
Oh, okay.
That is so good.
Thank
I
you.
feel like what Open Door Legal does is so completely aligned with what the Human Rights Working Group is about that I would like to explore other opportunities if there are. I'm not sure if we could talk to you, Sierra, about ways that we could work together with you. Of course, including maybe another presentation, but like, I don't know, volunteer opportunities. By the way, I was the one who asked the question about volunteer opportunities.
Yeah.
I think I could see myself wanting to do that in the future.
Great.
So, yeah, thank you so much for coming today. And, we have another question. Sorry, please come up.
Yeah, this is very impressive and exciting, and whoa.
Thank you.
So you mentioned something about, which I wasn't quite hearing correctly, about people not born in the United States having little power in terms of contract rights, the enforcement.
Well, if you're low income in the U.S.,
Okay.
it's very hard to enforce contracts because to do that you have to go through the court system, and if you can't get a lawyer, it's basically impossible. If you're not documented, though, you still have like formal contract rights. So, you know, if you make a contract with somebody and they don't honor it, you can go to court and enforce it if you can get legal help.
Okay. Do you work at all with criminal law?
We don't do anything the public defender would do.
Okay.
But we are doing some post-conviction relief, like expungements or certificates of rehabilitation.
Okay. And then the map that you showed in the beginning of this presentation kind of blew me away.
You want to bring it up again?
I mean, Russia was included in that, and you know, and I'm just wondering how maybe the opportunities exist to have legal representation, but how does it work?
Yeah. Reshare. I'm glad you like this map. It took me a while to put together. Yeah, well, the gray countries weren't ranked by the World Justice Project. The gray countries on the map weren't actually ranked by the World Justice Project other than the US. The red countries were ranked as having a less accessible civil justice system, and the blue a more accessible civil justice system. So this is not the same as like what are the formal rights. You know, obviously in San Francisco you have more rights than in Russia, but in Russia they've done a lot to actually make the court system more accessible. For example, in small claims it's done totally online. You can submit your paperwork online. They have more attorneys per capita kind of funded to represent people who can't afford it, and they're attached to the court systems and things like that. Well, you know, whereas in San Francisco, in small claims, it's all paper filing. You have to hire a runner. You have to go there. You have to do the service yourself. There's no legal assistance available, et cetera. But, you know, Russia isn't actually that great internationally. It's just the US is so completely awful that, you know, it sounds great in comparison. But, you know, when you consider Finland, right, where, you know, the legal aid statute in Finland says you have a right to an attorney in anything that would require expert assistance, any legal matter that would require expert assistance. Small business issues, asylum claims, family issues, evictions, you know, anything like that. So that's more the standard.
We had some people that may have joined late, either online or in person. Can you talk about immigration law? Did San Francisco set up a fund a few years ago to pay for the legal aid for immigrants? I remember Jeff Adachi was working on that.
San Francisco put together some money to fund deportation defense for detained immigrants, and there's also a separate pot to fund deportation defense. And yeah, that's super helpful, and that's part of the overall funding for legal aid. There's still not enough. People are being turned away every day who request help with deportation defense. It doesn't need to be that way. I mean, nobody should die because they can't get legal help, right? That's what I think. But If you have a good asylum claim, you can't afford a lawyer. Often that's what happens.
Well, if there are no other questions, I guess we'll be wrapping up a little early today. And so I'll take a little bit of everyone's time to talk about upcoming events. The Human Rights Working Group is working a lot these days on the Gaza crisis, which concerns us all so much. I mean, it's our feeling that we are witnessing a genocide unfolding while the world watches. So there are a lot of things that you can do to take action on that. One of them, there's a big protest happening today down at the Ferry Building. It begins around noon, and it's called Hands Off Rafah, I believe, because we believe a ground invasion of Rafah is about to begin, and this will be a very, very tragic circumstance if it happens. 2 weeks from today, on April 7th, in this room, we're planning to have a big event. We hope you will all be there, that you'll invite other people, and even help us promote it. So this is going to be a benefit for the Jenin Freedom Theater, which is a theater company in the Jenin refugee camp in the West Bank. And we've got some posters on the table over there. If you think you know of a place where you could put one of those up, please grab one and take it with you. We'll be showing some videos. Unfortunately, the presenter we had planned on having, a person from the theater company, was not given permission to travel from the West Bank, so we'll be showing some videos of him speaking instead. But this should be a really fun event. Bruce has arranged for some great slides to be shown, some poetry reading, and just good community. We'll have lunch too, so please come for that. 1 p.m. in this room 2 weeks from today. I'd like to tell you also that in my neighborhood, I live in Noe Valley, and we're having a vigil for Gaza in the main square in Noe Valley this Thursday around sunset. So if you live anywhere near there and would like to join us, please feel free to do that. And we have a group called UUJME, UU's for Justice in the Middle East. It's kind of a subcommittee of the Human Rights Working Group. And if this appeals to you, please get in touch with any of us. So we have a meeting once a month, and we're taking on lots of projects and things to try to work on this issue. So thank you for that. And no forum next Sunday. We're taking a week off. And then 2 weeks from today, we'll have Stephen Zunes, a professor from USF, talking about Israel and Palestine 2 hours before we come back here on the same day for that event I told you about. Please grab a poster. Please sign our sign-up sheet so we can get more information about upcoming events, and thank you for coming.